In 2017, more people are becoming outwardly open with who they love and want to be. A big controversy right now is transgender people in sports. I'll be refuting the claim that transgender athletes gain a significant advantage in competitive sports. Their secondary claims were strength and physical dexterity are unaffected by most transgender procedures. Second, transgender women invading a sport that only women can compete in results in athletes who have a much greater advantage to win. And lastly, transgender athletes have access to substances banned under sporting rules. First, in their first claim, my claim against it is strength and physical dexterity are affected by transgender procedures. They didn't cite anything in the first subclaim, and throughout the claim of fact, they only cited news reports about transgender women beating cisgender women. Cisgender women are people born from birth as females in sports such as weightlifting, wrestling, and the MMA, which are some examples, and the rest is their words because there's no cited evidence. One quote that wasn't cited: the main reason for the gap in statistics between male and female athletes is men's higher aerobic capacity on average, which is due to their typically having less body fat, more hemoglobin and muscle mass, and larger hearts and lungs than women, which is Chris S. in Ohio University. But with the transgender surgery, males do develop some things like women. Decrease in mass, a quote from MD Stanley J. Swarzowski says, decrease in muscle mass and strength, redistribution of fat from abdominal area to hips and buttocks, and weight gain do happen in transgender procedures. I would wrestled for 4 years in high school and got second place in CIF. Freshman and sophomore year, we were only allowed to wrestle men because they didn't have a women's league for wrestling. And in this, I won first in district championships, which shows that, with this being said, just because men can gain more strength and physical dexterity doesn't mean they are, and sometimes doesn't even mean they have an advantage in a sport. This quote is from a transgender going from male to female that plays sports, specifically baseball and now softball. My mechanics of playing didn't change, she says, of her agility and coordination. But my muscle strength decreased significantly. I can't throw as hard, says Savannah Burton. Secondly, transgender women invading a sport that only women can compete in does not result in transgender athletes having a much greater advantage to win. For trans women to even compete in in a sport, their testosterone levels have to be the same as women. Published last year in the Journal of Sporting Cultures and Identities, the study showed that testosterone levels approaching female norms, trans women experience a decrease in muscle mass, bone density, and other physical characteristics. It's not the anatomy that matters, it's the hormones, says Harper, who is the chief medical physicist at Oregon's Providence Portland Medical Center. Also, Chris Moser, the first out trans man to compete in the men's U.S. national team at International Triathlon and Duathlon World Championships in June, said, people come in all shapes and sizes. We don't disqualify Michael Phelps for having super long arms. That's just a competitive advantage he has in his sport. We don't regulate height in the WNBA or NBA. Being tall is just an advantage for a center. For as long as sports have been around, there have been people who have had advantages over others. A universal level playing field does not exist. Lastly, transgender athletes have access to substances that are banned under sports rules do not help them win in sports. In the original claim of fact, Mac Bex was brought up. Mac Bex won the 6A Regional Second Girls Wrestling Championship, and most people think this is because of the testosterone she's taking to turn into a male. A psychologist from the Child and Adolescent Gender Center in California told the newspaper, not every kid I've seen who has gone on testosterone has added muscle mass. Also, they did a vote in February 2016, and Mac Bex has been wrestling since 2013 to 2014. That's when she started. And the Dallas News report on a vote by Texas school superintendents on forcing students to compete as their gender listed on their birth certificate. It passed 95%, so they did regulate her to be in the girls wrestling championships. Also, being a wrestler myself, wrestling isn't all about strength, it is mainly about technique and coordination. If you don't have technique, you won't win a match on strength alone. Mac Bex went undefeated in 52 matches. My captain of my high school wrestling team went undefeated in 51 matches, and she didn't take any medication. So just because Mac Bex does take medication to turn to transgender doesn't mean that she wasn't great already. Again, my claim is that transgenders have the same advantages in competitive sports because strength and physical dexterity are affected by transgender procedures. Transgender women invading a sport that only women can compete in does not result in transgender athletes having a much greater advantage to win, and transgender athletes have access to substances that are banned under sporting rules does not help them win sports. Thank you.
Okay, the structural stuff is good. I was impressed that they found a lot of evidence that was specific to the particular cases that were being presented. I thought that that was effective. I like the personal examples that you used in a couple of spots. That worked well. So you're doing a good job on that. The analysis that you had on the second point really kind of deals with a value issue that's going on about what constitutes fairness, and that may be the problem with the advocate's argument because there is a fairness component to it, and I think that you respond to it pretty well. I also think that the argument that you present at the end suggests some application to that particular point also. Like I said, I appreciated on the third point that you've got some information and some testimony that's particular to kids who are transgender going through these things, and it doesn't necessarily affect their muscle mass. So I think you've got good examples on your side. You've got some expert testimony that mitigates some of the arguments that the advocate presented. It's nicely organized. I thought you had a good summary. The thing that's maybe a little bit problematic is the delivery. There's a lot of reading that goes on, and sometimes when you were talking about the examples, I do think now that they are your personal examples, but sometimes it sounded like you were talking about it in the third person, and that seemed a little weird. That's why you need to talk to us a bit more. Okay, thank you. Zach, we're going to have you probably as our last speaker for the evening here.